If you could go back and give your younger self financial advice, what would it be? Welcome to PlanAssist. This is a podcast where I interview successful people and experts in a particular field, and I start the interview off with one question. If you could go back and give your younger self financial advice, what would it be? And then I'll let the podcast conversation just grow from there based on their experience, their backgrounds, and their life views of finance and investing. I'm Tim Clifford. I'm a certified financial planner. I help people maintain and or grow their wealth. I started my career off on the floors of the commodity exchanges in Chicago, and then I moved into stocks and bonds working for H&R Block, Charles Schwab and Company, and Ameriprise. In 2012, I started Core Wealth Consultants, a small investment firm focused on helping families go into retirement and then to continue to either grow their wealth or to maintain their wealth or some combination of the two. And early in this venture, I realized I needed to come up with a framework to communicate with clients and build these strategies around. And so as I started looking for what were some common strategies or principles that successful people use or all successful people use. And what I found was when I looked at the people that I know, have interviewed, clients that I've had over the years, there was 5 or 6 kind of common things that they used or utilized to either grow their wealth or maintain their wealth. And then I looked at what Charlie Munger suggested on one of the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meetings, where someone asked him, what's the most important financial lesson you've learned? And Charlie Munger said it was to invert everything. So look at worst case scenarios. And he tells the story about when he was in the Army, he was in charge of reporting the weather to the pilots. And one of the things that he learned in that particular role was if he was just reporting the good weather to the pilots, that didn't add that much value to their life. So you have clear skies, you have minimal winds, a few clouds here and there, where the ceilings were, all that kind of stuff. What he found he added the most value is when he looked at the weather from a worst case scenario and inverted, what are the kind of weathers that would cause these pilots to crash? And so he started looking for things like ice, for high winds, for thunderstorms that could be moving in. And when he did that, he felt like he added a lot more value to those pilots' lives from a weather perspective. And when he left the Army, he started his investment practices. He started out in real estate, and he took that lesson into real estate, looking at what's the worst case scenario if I buy this building or if I buy this piece of property, and what would I need to do for this to be a complete financial disaster, and then looked at it from a positive perspective as well. And then he carried that to Berkshire Hathaway as well. So with that said, I started looking at what would families need to do to create as much chaos and financial uncertainty in their lives as possible. And what I found was 3 primary strategies that if they didn't do this, it would almost ensure financial chaos and financial disaster. And then I connected it against my people that I interviewed or looked at that were successful. And sure enough, they had the exact same 3. And those were have a plan, be diversified, and seek counsel. So when I looked at people who were really successful, they almost uniformly had some kind of financial plan. It may not have been that 45-page PDF document that went into detail, but they had some kind of a plan or strategy that they followed. And the people who had chaos in their lives had no plan at all. Everything was making a decision last minute, winging it, etc. The second was diversification. The people who had accumulated a decent amount of wealth and held on to it, they had a diversification strategy. And this one's the one I'm going to talk about today. And this one's a little more it's difficult. It's not more difficult, but it's difficult because there's no just kind of clear lines of yes, no, do this, don't do this. It's more art than science, but it's still something you have to be aware of and think about and have some kind of a strategy around it, whether you're diversified or concentrated. And then you look at the group on the other side, they had no diversification strategy. And then lastly was seek counsel. And whatever words you want to use around seek counsel, I get feedback on that all the time, but they don't like to seek counsel. They'll say call it advice or input or whatever words you want to use around seek counsel. The group that has accumulated a decent amount of wealth and held on to it, they're really good at asking for input, not sitting down with salespeople to sell them something, but what's worst case scenario, what's best case scenario, and getting input from people who have kind of been through it. And so whether you're calling it seeking counsel or Being curious is another way to think about it. And I'm going to do that on the next podcast after this one. So I'll go into detail on that. And the other group, terrible at that. So that gives you a little bit of sense of where I came up with have a plan, be diversified, seek counsel. Today, we're going to talk about diversification. Now, diversification is a way to maintain wealth. It's not how most people get rich, though. Most people get rich through concentration. So they're going to have a single investment almost always that's going to cause them to go from zero net worth to whatever number it is, 500,000, 750,000, $1 million in net worth, $5 million in net worth. Usually it'll come through concentration. And then to maintain that wealth, you have to figure out a way to kind of take that concentrated position and turn it into some level of diversification. And that is really difficult. So today I'm obviously not going to give you the answer because there isn't an answer. There's a lot of emotion attached to it. There's timing. There's the specific kind of investment. There's the tax that you need to talk through. There's just a lot of different data points and variables that someone needs to talk through. But the point becomes, more than likely, if you're going to create wealth or get wealthy, you're going to do it through concentration. But as you get closer and closer to retirement, it's going to be important to come up with some way to get more diversification into your life. Now, how you end up with a concentrated position is through a variety of different ways, right? So some of it's almost by accident. You work for a company and you're just buying the company or you're getting stock options. Another way is small businesses. Far and away, the number one concentrated position in America is in people's homes. That is by far the most common way that people will have a concentrated position is in their homes. 18% of households in America are millionaires, which surprised me, to be honest with you. That's a pretty big number, 18%. So almost 1 in 5 households in America have a total net worth of $1 million. But the other challenge with that number is only about 3 or 4% of that same group will be millionaires if you minus their homes. So about 18% will be millionaires with their home, 4% will be millionaires minus their home. So you can see there's a huge concentration of net worth in houses, and it's in the homes that people live in. So as you get farther and farther or closer and closer to retirement, as you get farther and farther into your career or closer and closer to retirement, one of your challenges that you want to kind of push yourself to is how do you get more net worth outside of your house and into kind of retirement accounts. So when you go into retirement, in a perfect world, you'd have more money in your investments than you would necessarily in your homes. So those are some of the big challenges that I see. The enemy that we all come up with when it comes to risk, one of the single biggest challenges we have is we get really attached to that concentrated position. So whether we inherited the position, whether it's our house, we live in our house, we can't sell our house. We work for the company, we think the company's going to go to the moon, and I don't want to sell because I'm going to leave money on the side. Those are all viable feelings and concerns. So I can't unfortunately give you a kind of silver bullet on when you should actually do it, but just know those are common concerns, but they still are really big challenges when it comes to managing your diversification strategy and not being too concentrated in one individual or two individual investments. The other thing that you want to be diversified across, so not only your investments that you want to be diversified across, but you also want to be diversified across tax liability. So you want to have money in your tax-free funds, taxable and tax deferred. So Roth IRAs, your regular account and your tax deferred account. So as you get into retirement, you'd have a little bit of money in each one of those buckets so you could kind of manage your tax liability. You also want diversification across when you need the money. So time and purpose is another thing that we call, so that you have liquidity needs when you need them. So if I know I'm going to need money in the next 12 to 18 months, I need to have that money in a money market, something more liquid than, say, the stock market. So if it goes down. So those are the kinds of things that you want to kind of think about when you think about diversification. And you can see it's way more complicated than just, let's just put it in a target fund as an example and be diversified across large cap, small cap, mid cap, international stocks. It's a much more diversified strategy that includes probably sitting down with a financial advisor and looking at it through the eyes of someone who's unbiased and using some kind of software system that they can plug the money in. Yesterday on the call, I talked about the importance at some point. You don't need to get there today when you start putting a simple plan together, but at some point you do want to put it into some kind of software system, just like if you were doing an extension on your home. Think of your financial planning software system as the CAD system. So if you were to do an extension on your home, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do without hiring an engineer, but at some point you're going to hire an engineer, and all that information is going to be put into a computer system that's going to make sure that the walls and the roofs and the beams and all the size of material that they're going to use to keep that safe under all conditions is important. That's the same thing that you do kind of thinking about a financial plan. So to wrap this up, diversification maintains wealth or preserves wealth. Concentration creates wealth. So you're going to have to go through both of those over your investment lifetime, and you're going to have to manage them both, and both take different perspectives and different views and different skill sets that you have to think about as you kind of transition from concentration to diversification, as an example, or you're early in your career building that original concentrated position. How do you manage that? How long do you stay in that position? How much do you let that allow? It's also, you want to pay attention to that home. It's fantastic to have a lot of net worth in your home, but remember, that's a very illiquid asset that actually costs money. So it's hard to build wealth in equity from a home that you're actually living in. So that gives you a couple things to think about. Hopefully it spurs some thoughts or some things that you might want to consider. If you sit down with your financial advisor, if you don't have a financial advisor, it'll cause you to think about, as you talk to different investment advisors, what about this or what about that, when they look at your specific individual needs or specific goals or kind of where you're at. But again, the thing to take away from this is know that diversification is a very, very important principle that you need if you're going to grow your wealth and if you're going to maintain your wealth, and do it with confidence. And the only way to do that is to do it with some intention and some thought behind it. So that means sitting down on a regular basis and looking at kind of, where's your money? Where is it? Why are we holding on to a particular investment? How do we get more diversification in our portfolio as you get closer and closer to retirement? So with that, I hope this has been helpful. Tomorrow we're going to talk about, or the next podcast that I'm going to do will be on seeking counsel. So remember, there's 3 primary principles. Have a plan, even if it's a small, really simple one-pager, but have some kind of a plan that you share with your significant other. Be diversified when you get to the point where you want to preserve your wealth, but through that, you're going to probably start off with a concentrated position. So you're going to have to think through that and have a strategy around that. And then lastly, seek counsel, which I'll talk about tomorrow. So please like and subscribe. And then this will set up the kind of format and the outline of the interviews I'm going to do with people who are either successful or people who are experts in a particular field. And we'll kind of talk through that to help you with specific questions, needs, etc. So it'll be kind of some form of seeking counsel. So with that, thank you very much for taking your time to do this podcast. And then if you have any opinions or want to add something to it, please feel free to add a note. If I missed something or you have some comment or suggestion, feel free to make a comment below. So with that, thank you very much and have a great day.